The question on everyone's mind is it really smart to buy a house when the interest rates are in the sixes and the sevens? Such a great question. And that's exactly what we're addressing today. We took a client who closed last month and took her exact numbers, put them up against people who closed 6 months earlier with a much lower interest rate to see how it pans out. So here's the numbers. Zach, dive into this for us. Is now really a good time to buy a house?
So we went back and looked at the market when it was kind of peaking in that March and April area. We went and looked at a specific HOA, like apartment complex, and we said, okay, we're going to look at all the 3 bedrooms, 2 baths that have sold in the past 6 months. So as we went back to March, one that sold was for $366,500, and the average rate around that time was about a 4.625, giving the client who purchased that home a payment around $1,790 per month. Then we looked at the client that we just helped out who purchased in October, who purchased in the same place, 3 bedroom, 2 bath. She got the place for $320,100, and she took an interest rate of a 7.125 with a principal and interest payment of $2,048. So it was kind of interesting to see how, as interest rates have come up, we've started to see prices slowly decline. And so on our next slide, as we look at that, we can look at all of the solds from March until October, and it never goes in a straight line, right? It like the next one is a little bit higher, next one a little bit lower, next one a little bit higher. But as we look at the general trend of things, it's definitely trending down right now, with rates being in that 6 to 7% range.
Yeah, and I look at this and I think as rates kind of toyed around a little bit within a 1% range, there was some drop in price, but then the real drop in the price happens when this thing jumps a full 1.5%. Rates go up 1.5%. What happened? This project dropped $30,000 in purchase price on the exact same floor plan. That's amazing. Now, you look at the monthly principal and interest here, and this is worth pointing out. The guy who bought his place in March, his payment's only $1,790 because he has such a low interest rate at 4.65. But our client who just bought for $320, she's got an interest rate of 7.125, but that payment's $2,048. So it really is like $258 more per month that she's paying than this guy. But look at the amount of equity she saved, right? It's substantial. So this next slide points that out. Here's the March buyer, what they paid. Here's our buyer in October. She saved $46,400. That's a ton, but she is going to have to pay $258 a month more, until she can refinance it sometime down the road. She's just stuck with that higher payment. So, I think what's interesting is to ask the question, well, how long can she continue to pay an extra $258 a month before she chews up this extra $46,000 that she came out ahead for buying it cheaper than the guy back in March? And it actually turns out to be about 180 months. She could keep the higher rate, never refinance, and she'd cross over right around that 15-year mark, where if she never did anything, then her house starts to become more expensive after 15 years. But anytime up until the 15-year point, she comes out ahead from the guy who bought his house in March. Isn't that interesting?
Wow.
But you're saying there's a likelihood of a refinance. So talk us through that.
So what we're seeing right now, at least with the Federal Reserve, they're saying, hey, look, we're really targeting 3 or 4% for 2023 on our inflation numbers. And then for 2024, they're targeting 2% on inflation, which is kind of a beautiful thing because, right, if they're telling us that's what they're planning on hitting, granted, they're not always going to hit their marks exactly when they say they're going to, but at least they're telling us where the trend's going to be. And if inflation is at 2% or 3% or even 4%, we know that there's going to be a refinance opportunity in the next 24 months. And so likely you're going to be in the 5s during 2023 and likely the 4s in 2024.
So, this is interesting because we're saying she saved $46,400 on the purchase price, But let's say that she's just stuck with that 7.125 for 2 years. She pays it for 24 months. So she spends $6,200 extra, more than the guy who got it cheaper. And then on top of that, she also has to pay for a refi. So let's say that costs $3,500 to refinance. Well, after 2 years, she still comes out almost $37,000 ahead. And then, this slide, go ahead and explain this one.
So then if she ends up refinancing, and let's just say she refinances to a 5.625, nothing great, but she still improves by 1.5%. That would then put her payment at $1,750 per month, which is now about $40 lower than the gentleman who purchased back in March. And so we ended up saying, well, what if she keeps this for the full 30 years and has that payment for the next 28 years? She still saves an additional $13,293, which would put her total savings at roughly $49,986, purchasing now versus purchasing last spring.
I love it. I love it, because what you're saying is, let's assume that she never gets back to the same rate that the guy did in March of 2022, and that she's permanently a full percent ahead of that guy. And still, because she bought it for such a lower price, her payment is still lower by almost $40 a month. That's amazing. So by the time you add up everything, the extra equity that she picked up instantly, plus the extra money she paid over the next 2 years to refi, plus the cost to refi, and then factor in the fact that her payment's lower, she comes out $50,000 ahead of the guy who bought the place in March at a 4.625.
And that's probably conservative, because I think if we time it a little bit better than what we've played with the scenario, she probably ends up maybe at a 4.5 instead of a 5.625 or something like that. So that could easily change to be a $60,000 or a $62,000 change.
Yeah. Yeah. So, back to that question, because this is what people are asking is, oh man, rates are so high. I don't want to buy a house right now because I don't want a 6 point something or a 7 point something. What they're missing is the flip side of that coin, which is, yeah, the rate's higher, but the property is substantially lower in price, because sellers are having to lower their price because there's not as many people available to purchase, right? They're sitting on the sideline.
If you're a buyer, you've got your seller in the perfect position that you want them. You've got the selection that you can now go look at 5, 6 different homes. You can then put offers in on, the one that you like the most. You can have your inspections. You don't have to waive an appraisal. There's a lot of things that I'm loving about this market for a buyer, that you just have a lot more control and you kind of have the upper hand on the seller.
Yeah, yeah, fantastic. So really, this is,
and all for what? $250 more per month?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
It's not that big of a difference. The media would have you believe that you're paying an extra $1,000 or $1,500 per month because of this high interest rate. But as we really break it down, on a condo like this, you're paying an extra $250. You wouldn't really make that decision to buy or not to buy over such a small amount of, small amount per month.
And when you look at the big picture, which nobody's talking about, because I like what you just said, I read about probably 20 different articles a week that are put out in the real estate world. And I'm going to tell you, 18 out of 20 of those are saying the sky is falling. This is a terrible time to buy. But none of those people have done the analysis. They're not actually looking at this saying, yeah, the rate's higher, but you're saving $40,000. So how does that equate? Short term, long term, what does that look like? And I'd say this probably won't last forever. It's a rare thing to actually see sellers who are willing to drop the price as aggressively as we've seen the last few months. And what's going to happen is, as rates drop down, people come back into the market, right? All these people who are sitting on the sidelines right now are saying, I'm going to wait until rates get down to 5 something, and then I'm going to come in. Well, guess what happens? As soon as the rates hit 5 something, boom, prices are going to go back up. People are going to be pushing things back up again. Sellers are not going to have to discount their price like they've been doing.
When all of a sudden, instead of 18 negative articles, you're going to see 5 negative articles, and there'll be 15 saying, oh, now's the time to buy.
Right. And that's because the media is always going to be behind what's really happening. So, instead of paying attention to all that garbage that you're hearing out there, what a terrible time it is, look at the numbers, crunch the numbers. Anyone who wants us to help do this with them, we'll help you crunch the numbers so you can see what makes sense. Let's take 1 second, just look at like the long-term appreciation, like who's the real winner?
So I see the real winner is who's ever able to purchase properties and then keep them for a long period of time. So if we look back at the first home you ever purchased in Provo, you bought that thing for what, 54,000
Yeah,
back
right
in
around
93?
54 to 56. And that was 1993.
Okay.
So it's been a while. And, that's an interesting thought because someone might say, oh, I'm paying a little too much right now. What if you're paying 10% higher for a property? Or, let's say you did. So you bought something back in March that was 10% higher than it is now. It's not the end of the world because over time, this stuff just kind of washes out. If I had paid an extra 10 or even 20% more for my house in 1993, would I even care right now? 5 years later, 10 years, 20 years later, it wouldn't matter because if you look right here at this chart, Utah has had appreciation of 599.2% over the last 30 years. Now, granted, that's the highest in the country, but still an average of 275.1 nationwide. So real estate is a great place to be. It's a great place because it puts a roof over your head, but it's also a great investment. There's a lot of great tax advantages. We could talk all day about that kind of stuff. But
Right.
yeah, I would agree. People, the real winners don't get tripped up over, oh, I'm going to try and save $10,000 right now. Just get in, get something. This is a really good time to do this. There will be an opportunity to refinance down the road. And you can see from our example how those numbers just shake out totally, totally in your favor. Any last thoughts?
Yeah, so I mean, the flip side of who's the real winner, if we look at who's the real loser, it's whoever decides to rent for the next 30 years and never jumps into buying a home. Think about if you had never purchased your first home, back in 93 and rented over the past 30 years,
Oh,
how different your life would be and just, what areas you would have ended up in versus, purchasing.
yeah. Yeah. Good point. So it makes sense to get out of the rental pool and become an owner and start to build equity and build your own net worth instead of somebody else's.
Right.
All right, thanks for your insight, Zach. You're awesome.
Take care.